I think, therefore I am. But I'm thinking all the time, and I don't know who I am. Am I? Are you? I'm in the middle of nowhere, and it's a good place to be. Welcome to Just Nowhere with Dr. Samuel Zinner.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Just Nowhere. Tonight we have a very special guest, his second appearance on this program of Dr. Vesselin Petkov of the Minkowski Institute. The subject tonight is gravity. Dr. Petkov's views on gravity are shaped by Minkowski for the Spacetime, and so we'll begin with an overview of Hermann Minkowski's concepts of four-dimensional spacetime and geometry. Thank you.
Minkowski was at that time first he wanted to develop the mathematical formalism of this four-dimensional world in its splendor. That's why he published later in fact he gave his major presentation on the structure of space-time in December, I believe, 1907, and it was published the following year in the spring as a 59 treatise. So it's a monumental work, and we're still using this mathematical formalism of space-time. So essentially Minkowski said that all relativistic effects, what Einstein called relativity of simultaneity and relativity of time, Einstein didn't talk about relativity of space. In fact, according to Minkowski, manifestations of a higher reality, what Minkowski called the Welt or the world. Now we call it either Minkowski space-time or just space-time. And why this is so important that one should start with Minkowski. First, because the concept of space-time, according to Minkowski, represented a real four-dimensional world. That's why Minkowski was so excited when he introduced the concept of the world, of this four-dimensional world. Some people still think that space-time is nothing more than a mathematical space. Usually I ask a simple question. If this were the case, why a mathematician would be so excited about the introduction of one more mathematical space? Of course, this is not an argument. The arguments, essentially Minkowski's arguments for the reality of space-time, and even Minkowski's arguments for the reality of space-time are so strong that everyone who has doubts about the reality of space-time could read Minkowski's summary of his discovery of the space-time structure of the world, his famous lecture of 1908, and try to explain the relativistic effects of Minkowski's two main arguments in that paper by assuming that space-time is not real, that the real world is what we perceive, a three-dimensional world, and then it becomes absolutely clear that none of the kinematic relativistic effects would be possible if space-time were nothing more than a mathematical space. And the real world was the three-dimensional world of our perceptions. Now, why this is so important? Because gravity is considered to be manifestations of the non-Euclidean geometry of space-time, or in simple words, the manifestation of the curvature of space-time. So, and now this is the central point of understanding the nature of gravitation.
Yes.
Einstein himself didn't make his views about what his general relativity in fact is whether gravitational effects are nothing more than effects of the curvature of space-time. But in a famous letter now, written in 1948, he said, I do not agree with the idea that general relativity geometrized physics or gravity. And most people credit Einstein precisely for this, that he said that there is no gravitational force, all gravitational phenomena were manifestations of the curvature of space-time. And you can imagine what kind of intellectual challenge this had been to Einstein. All the world believed that gravity is a force. But what I always have been telling my students, there is no democracy in science. Einstein was alone against the whole world saying, no, you're all wrong. Gravity is curvature of space-time. And now back to the question, why Einstein in 1948 said that I do not agree. And the answer to this question is not that simple in a sense, but on the other hand, it's quite simple. Because Einstein, it seems, had doubts about the reality of space-time. And if space-time wasn't real, then how could gravity could be a curvature of something that does not exist? So Einstein had been really quite consistent in his views. But what is interesting, that after 1948, Einstein seems to have started to change his view about the reality of space-time. So in 1952, 4 years after that letter, Einstein added a fifth appendix, Relativity and the Problem of Space, to the 15th edition to his book for general audience, Relativity, the Special and General Theory, where his doubts that space-time represents a real four-dimensional world seem to have been overcome. He wrote, I believe I have it here, it appears therefore more natural to think of physical reality as a four-dimensional existence, instead of as hitherto the evolution is in italics, Einstein's italic, instead of the evolution of a three-dimensional existence. So now Einstein explicitly talks about a real four-dimensional world. And maybe 3 years later, just before Einstein died, in fact, I have the date, exactly the month. In March 1955, Einstein wrote a letter of condolences to the widow of his longtime friend Michel Besson, which gives another indication of what seems to be Einstein's full realization of the depth of Minkowski's discovery that reality is an absolute four-dimensional world. He wrote, "Now Besson has departed from this strange world a little ahead of me. That means nothing. People like us who believe in physics know that the distinction between past, present, and future is only a stubbornly persistent illusion." So now, I believe everyone can realize why Einstein had these doubts about the true nature of gravitation, because the direct reflection of his doubts about the reality of space-time.
Well, I think I can underscore the importance of all of what you've said there, right, as now we approach the subject of gravity, right, that today the theory of quantum gravity, right, is we have a need, right? It's necessary in order to reconcile relativity and quantum mechanics. So it's at the root of one of the greatest challenges, right, in physics today. But the way you've expressed this right now is that, all right, if we start with Minkowski and the four-dimensional physics, right, this results in a space-time geometry, right, as you said, but the result is, right, then, as you pointed out, gravity, right, then might not be a physical interaction, right? So it's might help explain, right, why we're not able to create this theory of quantum gravity if gravity is a manifestation, right, of the non-Euclidean geometry of space-time. So I hope I'm making myself clear there in trying to summarize one of your papers. But it seems to me that one of the significances of that chain of argumentation there is that maybe, right, a lot of modern theorizing about gravity and trying to grapple with and understand it may be starting from an entirely unfounded or incorrect, right, view, not only of gravity, right, but more fundamentally of the nature of the world, right? So if we don't see the world as a four-dimensional Minkowski structure, then how can we ever understand gravity? So could you tell us what are some of the misconceptions about gravity because of the lack of understanding of 4D model? First of all, what are some of these what might be misguided theories and ideas about gravity today?
All right, I simply don't know from where to start. There's so many things that one should touch upon
All right.
about this issue. Maybe first, I would like to state clearly that I believe that the only attempt in the so-called camp of quantum gravity is loop quantum gravity. Because loop quantum gravity, the way I believe I understand it correctly, they are not trying to quantize physical interaction. They do not consider gravity as a physical interaction. They try to quantize gravitation by quantizing curved space-time itself. So this is the only relevant approach. Whether this could be correct or not, as always,
Sure.
The ultimate judge experiment would tell. But at least they're not tied with the idea that gravitation is a physical interaction. In other words, loop quantum gravity is based rigorously on the mathematical formalism of general relativity. They are not smuggling the concept of gravitational interaction as, unfortunately, Einstein did in his general theory of relativity. So the misconception is that it is taken for granted that gravity is a physical interaction. And this is a basic situation. One should start from this very basic question. You would like to quantize something, but first, even for the lack of consistency, one should ask the question, let's see whether really general relativity regards gravity as a physical interaction. Probably most people trusted Einstein a lot. Who said that gravitational interaction, he almost explicitly considered gravitational interaction in his general relativity. This is a beautiful theory. The mathematical. Let me explain why I believe that all physical phenomena, not all, I mean all gravitational phenomena, are fully explained in the formalism of general relativity. First, it is a well-known fact that the mathematical formalism of general relativity stubbornly and consistently refuses to produce tensorial expression for gravitational energy and momentum. What is used, which again started with Einstein, is a pseudo-tensor. But a pseudo-tensor can be made 0 of one reference frame, so it can be made, since it's a tensorial quantity, it could be 0 to all.
Right.
So only tensorial expressions represent real features of the world. So now, just exploring the internal logic or the formal structure of general relativity demonstrates that there is no room for gravitational energy and momentum in general relativity itself, in the logical structure and the mathematical formalism. Now let's see what the other arguments are. In fact, because some people, I know how some of my colleagues react, they say that probably this temporary difficulty, it will be overcome. 100 years passed, and we're still there. So let's start with one of the problems you said, you mentioned, I think, the appropriate word, misconception, because very often, and for especially people who believe that gravity should be quantized, that there is a gravitational force. There are different attempts to make changes, reformulate general relativity in order to make it amenable quantization.
Right.
So let's start first with the fact. I'm carefully using this word, the fact that there is no gravitational force in nature. Why there is no gravitational force in nature? Not because Einstein's theory told us. This is one thing. Einstein's theory of relativity clearly says that there is no such force in nature. But we know this from experiment. It's an experimental fact that falling bodies do not resist their fall towards the ground.
Right. Their acceleration.
Yes. And you see, this is one of the problems in the 21st century fundamental physics. What I'm about to say is a short conceptual analysis. Many colleagues, theoretical physicists, just don't take seriously conceptual analysis. And this is unbelievable. One should always keep in mind that Galileo was using such conceptual analysis. His famous thought and real experiments. Einstein did absolutely the same thing. He followed precisely what Galileo was doing with Einstein's thought experiments, especially in terms of gravity, Einstein's elevators accelerating or at rest on the Earth's surface. So, colleagues, physicists, I hope not the majority, do not take conceptual analysis seriously. Now, the promised brief conceptual analysis. Why? The experimental fact that falling bodies do not resist their motion proves, not just demonstrates, proves that there is no gravitational force. Because if now everyone who tries to object to this analysis should constantly keep in mind the very meaning of Newton's second law. If a body accelerates, a force is necessary for the body to accelerate. But again, the concepts, the very meaning of concepts in Newton's second law should be very clearly realized. The force is necessary to overcome the resistance a body offers to its acceleration. That's why a force is applied to overcome that resistance. So if a falling body does not resist its motion, it means that there is no force acting on the body. Because if a force were involved in the body falling towards the ground, then the body should have resisted its motion. So no resistance, no force, and the experiment is that if you drop, and this real experiments carried out, if you drop an accelerator, it reaches zero acceleration, zero resistance. And in fact, the acceleration, the curved space-time acceleration of a falling body is zero, which means that the world line of the falling body is a geodesic. No acceleration is attached to a geodesic world line. A world line should be curved, deformed, in order that you can say that acceleration is involved. So the apparent acceleration, which we all observe when the bodies are falling towards the surface, this is apparent acceleration because relative acceleration in general theory of relativity. There are two types of accelerations. Relative accelerations or geodesic acceleration is caused by the fact that there are no parallel lines, so they're curved, and when they approach each other, then there is acceleration observed between bodies. Absolute acceleration, so relative acceleration involves two bodies. Absolute acceleration involves a single body. So a single body whose world line is not geodesic, it is deformed, and then that body in general relativity is accelerating. Absolute acceleration, it holds in both special and general relativity. It means deformation of the world line of the accelerating body. And one more thing about at the very beginning, when you asked this question, you mentioned that quantum gravity is necessary to reconcile general relativity or the whole idea of space-time, which is fully deterministic. I don't know whether I'm using exactly the right expression, deterministic, but now I will not elaborate. If you have further question, I would explain what I mean by deterministic in this case. And the quantum theory, which has a statistical nature. Now that's another misconception.
All right.
In fact, there is no contradiction between space-time, the view of space-time, and quantum mechanics. The contradiction is, it comes from the implicit use of quantum object. Nowhere people work explicitly on the nature of the quantum object. Quantum mechanics deals with states of the quantum object, but not the quantum object itself. String theory is a different story.
Sure.
I would prefer not to mention it, and there are several reasons for this. But if despite the fact that quantum mechanics explicitly does not say what the quantum object is, in order to make clear that there is no contradiction between quantum physics and the space-time view of the world, let's say that the quantum object is somehow what follows from some experiments, because some experiments that prove the particle nature of, let's say, an electron, always find the electron, detect electron as a localized entity.
Yes.
And some people are tempted to think that the electron itself ultimately is a particle, maybe having a very strange behavior, but a particle. And if it's a particle, so it's a word line in space-time. And such a word line in space-time, no matter how complicated it really contradicts on the basic quantum mechanical experiments. For instance, the double-slit experiment cannot be explained by this.
Yes.
No. But no one forced us to consider that the electron is really such kind of entity. Because it clearly contradicts the experimental evidence. And for the sake of the argument that there is no contradiction between quantum physics and the space-time view of the world, one can think of the electron as a more complex structure. They are not only word lines in space-time. One can think of the electron, for instance, let me try to formulate it in such a way. Think of an electron really as a word line. And now assume that the word line disintegrates to its constituents, points. And they're scattered all over the space-time region where the wave function of the electron is different from zero. So those, they're statistically scattered in that space-time region. And if such kind of cloud of constantly appearing and disappearing because entities, because the ensemble of the disintegrated word line constitutes a single electron. But maybe I should say it in another way. Now, this idea of disintegrating the word line, in fact, brings the idea of atomism to its logical completion. Atomism not only in space, but in time as well. So you have fully accomplished the idea of atomism. And such kind of electron can go not only through two slits to as many slits at its disposal. And now the question is how such kind of statistical entity could always be measured as a localized dot. Because it's a matter of, this is in fact nothing new in quantum physics. And if you have a detector, when the first entity of this disintegrated word line falls in the detector, so then the boundary conditions change and all consequent constituents of the electron fall in the detector. So it is registered. And now you see, you would have probabilistic behavior, the electron as a probabilistic entity, but forever given this probabilistic distribution of the particles of the electron, forever given in space-time. And I guess Minkowski would have called this predetermined probability as some kind of mystery, as he used this expression in his 1908 paper.
Yes. Well, you've let me shift now. I know another one of your papers, you brought attention to some statements that Eddington wrote in the early 1920s, and I really appreciated his formulations. I think they're very good, even for a general audience, and that is he points out that while electromagnetism is a field or a force, gravitation is not, right? And he also says, I think it was 1921, that electromagnetism is a thing, right? And gravitation is not. Anyway, could you tell us about how Eddington came upon this line of reasoning? And it seems that, right, he found this insight that at the time was still, I think, right, unresolved for Einstein, or Einstein had just not gotten there yet. But,
Yes, in fact, it also in 1921, Eddington wrote that gravity as a separate agency becomes unnecessary.
right.
He essentially almost explicitly said that we don't need gravitational interaction. All gravitational phenomena explained by the curvature of space-time. So, in fact, I don't think that what Eddington said was some kind of extraordinary or eccentric insight. In fact, he was just interpreting the mathematical formalism of general relativity. The mathematical formalism tells us that all gravitational phenomena are fully explained as manifestations, effects of the curvature of space-time. He also pointed out immediately after the quote you gave that the electric field is a thing, gravitation is not a thing. Because he said that gravitation, and he pointed out that gravitation in terms of the energy and momentum of the gravitational field, he considered this gravitation. There is no proper mathematical tensorial expression for this. That's why he said it's not a thing, because there is no mathematical formalism, proper mathematical formalism, which represents something external, an external feature, where the mathematical formalism of the electromagnetic theory, the tensor of the electromagnetic field represents a real electromagnetic field. That's why, in this sense, he said that the electromagnetic field is a thing, and gravitational field is not a thing, because there is no corresponding mathematical expression in general relativity for gravitational field.
You know, it's very enlightening to view this matter from this prism, because I remember back in the what was it, maybe late 1980s, I forget, when I was taking like my first astrophysics class, right? One of our textbooks by I forget his first name, but Poggles. Right, when it comes to the subject, came to the subject of gravity, right, the whole discourse was about, well, maybe the best way to theorize about this is the whole idea of gravitons or gravitinos, right? I was looking back on it. What's surprising about it is that there was Minkowski was never mentioned, and in fact, in that entire semester, right? And so I was really surprised, to say the least, right, when I first discovered Minkowski's viewpoint, and then the implications it has for gravity. And I think I shared with you in an email how I was able to speak with a scientist involved in an engineering project. And I asked him, right, yeah, are gravitinos real? And he looked at me point blank and just said, no, they're not. And I said, how do you know? Because the course I took, right, at college, this is an open question, right? But anyway, that was the first time I was enlightened about Minkowski 4D spacetime and implications for gravity. So it's a thick fog. And so I think when I was mentioning about the theory of quantum gravity being necessary to reconcile general relativity and quantum mechanics, I was just referring to this is the common belief, right, in much of the field, based on the lacking this key, right, which is Minkowski 4D spacetime. Just to clear that up. But do you have anything that you would like to say about the whole theory, right, of gravitons or gravitinos?
Now you see, I don't think that one can say much or even try to elaborate more, because gravitons should be the carrier of the gravitational interaction. Mm-hmm. If there is no gravitational interaction, what kind of carriers one is talking about? And also, what kind of energy should be quantized if there is no gravitational interaction? And probably I should add, which I omitted to mention when answering your previous question, why there is no gravitational energy. Because not only I mentioned that the theory of, general theory of relativity, the mathematical formalism refuses to yield such kind of tensorial expressions for the gravitational energy momentum. I also mentioned the experimental fact that there is no gravitational force, and this is also theoretical fact, basic theoretical fact in general relativity. For instance, think clearly writes there is no such thing as gravitational force in nature. It just reads properly general relativity. And if there is no gravitational force, then one more argument why there is no gravitational energy. Because energy is defined as the work done by gravitational energy, should be defined as any other energies, as the work done by, in this case, gravitational forces. But if there are no gravitational forces, what kind of work and what kind of energy? So in that sense, I believe that one should not even bother to try to follow what is proven to be a wrong direction. And this is one of the, I think, one of the major problems in modern physics, because everyone knows that in the last several decades there have been no major breakthroughs in fundamental physics, despite the fact that we have very talented physicists, and also the huge advancement in technology and experimental physics. So one can carry out very precise measurements. And despite all this, no major breakthroughs of the type of general relativity and quantum mechanics. Right. And one of the reasons could be exactly this. There are several, in fact, I believe reasons, probable reasons for the lack of fundamental breakthroughs in fundamental physics. And one of those is people start with something without properly examining the basic assumptions, and they carry out research, and a lot of others follow. So a lot of intellectual potential is virtually wasted. So just imagine how many people are working assuming that there is gravitational force, when the experiment clearly demonstrates that there is no gravitational force. And also a lot of method theoretical probable reasons for the lack of breakthroughs. For instance, many people don't have proper understanding of the nature of the physical theories. For instance, in the case, since we're talking about space-time, in the case of space-time, they're saying that, oh, this is just a description. What is description? And not only just a description, they're saying that the question of the reality of space-time, this is not physics. This is should be left to philosophers.
Philosophers.
No, but the question of the nature of space-time, this is the question of the dimensionality of the world. And I don't believe that physicists deal with the question of the dimensionality of the world. This is a matter of basic fundamental physics. And of course, there are a lot of things in physics which are just a matter of description, like the Newtonian, Lagrangian, and Hamiltonian formulation of classical mechanics. But the art of physics is precisely this. Part of the art of physics is precisely this, to determine which is description like these three theories, and which mathematical formalism represents something real in the external world.
Right, right. Another point that you brought up is that it's many consider the big open question on all of this to be how to quantize what appears to be gravitational interaction. But you counter that with saying, no, the big open question is how matter determines the geometry of space-time. And on that subject, could you tell us, expand on that point, right? That on the what you call the big open question, right? And how should we go about trying to investigate that, right? How matter determines the geometry of space-time, and not this attempt to quantize it.
Yes, I believe I'm not alone to believe that this is the most fundamental open question in gravitational physics. I'm using this expression gravitational physics. It doesn't presuppose gravitational interaction, the existence of gravitational interaction. We all see gravitational phenomena around us, and those gravitational phenomena are studied by gravitational physics. Now, it is in Einstein's equations that it is the stress energy tensor of matter or pressure or any other electrical field, any other types of physical entities which are described by stress energy tensor, and that observation makes most people believe that matter determines the geometry of space-time, that it curves space-time. If this is so, then obviously it is self-evident that the most fundamental question is how this is done. And instead of devoting a lot of intellectual energy to this question, first, before trying to develop a theory of quantum gravity, should be the first priority of all physicists dealing with the fundamental questions of gravitational physics. Now, I'm not aware of any real attempts to try to tackle this issue. In fact, I remember my supervisor of my master in physics back in the University of Sofia. He made such an attempt. Even this model of bringing the atomism to its four-dimensional completion is his own achievement, and he considered that matter can be represented by some kind of delta function like structures in space-time. Essentially, he seems to have reversed the question, and this is a logical possibility. He said that instead of trying to explain how matter curves space-time, it may turn out, we should think also of this possibility, it may turn out that matter itself is a manifestation, a result of extreme curvature of space-time. So extreme curvature of space-time is perceived by us as matter, and then the tail of that curvature, when it goes down, dies down, is perceived by us as the curvature of space-time.
Fascinating.
So at this point, first, there is no real attempt to try to explain how matter curves space-time. But at the same time, I think that the other logical possibility that matter itself may turn out to be effect of extreme curvature of space-time should be also studied. At this moment, I have nothing more to add because there is no progress in those directions. Even I am not aware of the beginning of any investigations in these two directions.
No, that's utterly fascinating. Yeah, I wasn't aware of that. Did he write any papers on this this possibility?
Yes, this possibility is on my website on the right side, four-dimensional atomism, and the author of this paper is Anastassov, my former supervisor. And it's, I don't remember, it's 20-something pages.
Fascinating. Well, yeah, I'll include a link to that paper in the description to this interview. Now we start to wrap this up. I'll go back to this scientist that I mentioned before, who was working on an engineering project for the American government. Let's put it that way. Right. So this is where I first heard of Minkowski for his space-time. But now what I want to point out is that he was using this knowledge for a propulsion engineering project for something that was very practical, right? So just not theoretical, but of course the theoretics forms the basis, right, for the practical engineering project, right? And so I wanted to bring attention to one of your papers. I want to keep this theoretical, so I don't want to get into the engineering aspects of it, but you wrote a paper in 1998 on the possibility of a propulsion drive creation through a local manipulation of space-time geometry. Could you tell us the theoretical basis of that paper without getting into the engineering aspects?
Yes, and in fact, the following year, in 1999, there was a follow-up paper presented at the same place. NASA's organized, it was a large breakthrough propulsion conferences. And the second paper is called Propulsion through Electromagnetic Self-Sustained Acceleration. Okay, so I would return to the first, which you mentioned. Now, probably I believe it's clear that the answer of this question is directly related to your previous question, how gravity could change space-time. If you really understand that mechanism, or the other theoretical possibility that matter itself is an effect of extreme curvature of space-time, then obviously we may try to see whether we can manipulate the geometry artificially, not through the way nature is doing this, to make it to change the local properties of the local geometry of space-time, and then we will essentially produce artificial gravity. And if we have an object and we change the property of space-time, it could create the conditions as if there is a large mass here and the object is moving in that direction. Because as if that there is large mass could be exactly the location where we would successfully change the geometry of space-time. Now there have been, I'm aware there have been different proposals using mostly electromagnetic effects in order to see whether we can affect the geometry of space-time. Even in which year? It was 86, I believe. David Griffiths published a one-page paper. Let me see. Yes, no, 1985. David Griffiths published a paper, Electrostatic Levitation of a Dipole. And it produced a lot of interest. I also, my second paper at the NASA Breakthrough Propulsion Conference was based to some extent on this and on another idea which I was developing at that time, the anisotropic propagation of light and therefore of electromagnetic interaction in non-inertial reference frames. And just in parenthesis, some years ago, it was brought to my attention that a colleague, a physicist, I believe, criticized Griffiths and myself that we made erroneous conclusions. I never bothered to reply that paper. Probably one day, if I have time, I probably would reply to that paper. It was perfectly clear to me that that colleague simply did not use the proper volume, anisotropic volume element in the non-inertial reference frame of an observer on the surface of the Earth. By the way, to my knowledge, David Griffiths did not bother at all to reply. So the question was, it follows from an idea of Thomson, J.J. Thomson in 1881, I believe. He first observed that a charged particle offers greater resistance than a particle, otherwise neutral particle, the same particle, same mass, but neutral particle. And then the idea of the electromagnetic mass started to emerge. And it turned out that mass, the electromagnetic mass of a charged particle was velocity dependent. But when Einstein appeared, then it was he declared that this applies to all types of masses. So now, if the mass is at least part of the mass of a charged particle is electromagnetic in nature, then when you accelerate a particle, there would be a self-force, electromagnetic self-force resulting from this electromagnetic mass, which will oppose the acceleration. And by the way, Feynman very nicely explained this. Let me show you just this page of Feynman, his second volume. And this force of resistance, self-force, originates from the fact that the particles is accelerating, because as Feynman considered, and in fact it was considered by all people who were developing the electromagnetic mass theory, was originating from the interaction, in fact the repulsions of the elements of an electron, which is modeled by a sphere. So this was the classical electron. It was considered as a charged sphere. So every element of the sphere interacts, repulses other element, all other elements.
Yes.
And when the electron is moving inertially, then these forces of repulsion, they cancel out in pairs, and there is no resulting self-force. But when you start to accelerate the force, as Feynman brilliantly explained, that balance is disrupted, and self-force appears, and this force is the inertial force. So, why I brought here into my answer the question of the electromagnetic mass? Because repulsion results in resistance, and if you have a charge, an electron, again modeled as a sphere, supported in gravitational force, that self-force will be pointing downwards, which would be the equivalent of the gravitational force acting on an electron. Now, and this comes because of the repulsion. And what Griffiths investigated, what happens if you have attraction? So attraction results by the same logic that in non-inertial reference frame, the electromagnetic interaction has a different velocity, and this results in a levitating force. And this is because of the field lines of an electron. Let me see whether I can show it.
Yes.
Are deformed. In order to say why they're deformed, just imagine that from all points of a charged sphere, a light signal is emitted in all directions. And due to the curvature of space-time, light is curved. So essentially, that deformation of the electromagnetic field, that deformation of the electromagnetic field is called by the curvature of space-time. So this effect, some people believe that could eventually be used to engineer the geometry of space-time for some practical purposes. But this is nothing more at this point as a theoretical result. As I said, we know very little how matter curves space-time, or how matter could be an effect of extreme curvature.
Right, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to keep the review or the summary of that particular paper on a theoretical level. And I like how you phrased it. I'll summarize it myself, but I think already perhaps in the abstract, and that is, right, instead of a force to the body itself, the geometry of space-time is subjected to a local manipulation, which in turn results in the body's motion. So that's the I think
in one sentence.
Yeah, in one sentence, and really I think is lucid, even for a general audience. Right, it's quite a revolutionary concept if we think of how we use automobiles and planes and space rockets. Right, this is a totally different possibility. But anyway, Vesselin, this is an utterly fascinating subject. And when it comes to the subject or the topic of gravity, sincerely, I can't think of anyone I'd rather inquire of than you, right? Based on my readings, right, of your writings, which are so generously available, right, for free online. It's thank you so much for your time. Sincerely appreciate it.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed the program, please consider supporting this channel with a donation through Patreon or PayPal. And don't forget to subscribe. Thank you.